Well, welcome to Crossroads. This is a casual conversation with pastors and friends exploring the intersection and particularly the confrontation that our faith as Christians has with the culture of this world. I'm Michael John, pastor of the Market Street Baptist Church right here in Amesbury, and joining me today, as usual, our good friends, Dave Hammer, pastor of the Danville Baptist Church, and Rick Harrington, pastor of First Baptist Church in Haverhill.
Good to be here.
Welcome, men.
Good to see you.
Well, today we are discussing a topic, a ministry, I would say, that is very dear to my heart. I believe this is, perhaps you'll agree with me on this, this is the most underrated ministry in the church today. And yet I think it is one of the most powerful that we could do, especially in the American church. And that is the ministry of hospitality we'll be taking on today. I grew up with this because my mom was an immigrant, my grandparents were immigrants, and they seem to value this a little bit more than Americans do. And I think perhaps your families might agree with that as well. But we want to talk about this of hospitality and try to get a vision for this in the American church today, what it could look like and the effect that it can have. And so we want to begin with just a note from the scriptures about the importance of hospitality. Romans 12:13, Paul commands Christians to practice hospitality. And when he gives the description of what an elder or a pastor in the church is to be, one of the requirements of elders and pastors in 1 Timothy and in Titus is they are to be hospitable. And then furthermore, even in Hebrews 13:2, it says, don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Very interesting passage. We're not going to delve into that whole thing just yet, but for our discussion, I have three basic questions. One is, what is hospitality? What is this ministry about? Why is it so important? And then, how do we do it? So we're going to start with that first question. Dave, I'm going to start with you here. What is hospitality? How would you define what this is? What are we talking about here?
Well, Michael, the word hospitality is from a Greek word that means love for the stranger. But the way it's used is welcoming someone, an outsider, into our home. A stranger or someone in need into our home and providing for them, whether it's food, connection and relationship, or even a place to sleep. When we get the examples, you see it in a variety of different ways. Yeah, let's talk about some of those examples. I don't know if Rick, feel free to add to his definition there as well. But from here, what are some good examples of hospitality in the Bible? The Bible commands us to show hospitality, and we have a lot of stories in the Old Testament and the New Testament about that. Can you share a little bit about some reflections from the scriptures of what hospitality looks like?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly. So there are hospitality kind of cultures that make a real big deal about this, and the United States overall is not really a hospitality culture. So some of the stories in the Bible seem strange to us, but in much of the world that would make perfect sense. Much of the Middle East and so forth, that if you welcome someone into your home, you are committing to protect them. You're committing to treat them as if they're family. So one of the more shocking ones is the story of Lot in Sodom and Gomorrah, where these two angels appear in the city, the appearance of men, and he welcomes them into his home, and these people try to basically take over his home and get the two men, and he is willing to offer up his daughters in place of them, which I think is reprehensible, but it is understandable in the context of a hospitality culture, which we don't understand, right? Yeah. Or Rahab hiding the spies. Willing to risk even really ultimately treason against their own people to protect those spies. Yeah. They come from a hospitality culture where it's the moment you welcome someone into your home, they are yours to now protect and to watch over and to provide for. So
yeah, that's a strange the whole Lot story where he values them as more important than his own daughters, that his own life, his own family, and it's a confusing story, it's a disturbing story. But you're not supposed to be disturbed by Lot. You're supposed to be disturbed by what's happening in Sodom, that these strangers are coming in. And the men of the town want to abuse them and take advantage of them in their vulnerable state. Because the stranger coming through, he has no protectors. If he is killed or something happens to him, no one will know, and they won't get in trouble for this. And so hospitality is so important for that. Dave, can you think of some other examples or share with us a little bit about hospitality in the Bible and how it might give us some idea of what it looks like?
I think about Jesus in the Gospels, where he doesn't have a home, and he's, after he becomes an itinerant preacher, really. And I believe he used Peter's house as a home base, and so Peter is hospitable there, and then he eats in a number of other people's homes while he's doing his ministry. And then you see this through the book of Acts, where where it says that they were in each other's homes eating and they were sharing their lives with each other.
Yeah.
And then you could point out other examples from the book of Acts. Maybe I'll just mention one other, is when the jailer, I think the Philippian jailer, he lets Paul and Silas out of prison in the middle of the night, and he brings them to his home, and he cleans up their wounds, and he feeds them, and he ends up being baptized by them, he and his family. It seems to be sort of part and parcel with the way that Christianity creates love in our hearts, and that love comes out. One of the ways it comes out is opening our homes to one another, I think.
Yeah. Let's move to our next question here, which is why it's so important. And I really believe that the most important ministries that we do as Christians, the most important services that we do, are those that most clearly reveal the character and the nature of God the Father, and most boldly proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. I really believe that. You'll see that where the things that reflect the glory of God and His grace and His love are the most powerful and life-changing, that most clearly proclaim the beauty of Jesus and the gospel are most life-changing. And I think hospitality fits both those. And so I want to talk with you first. Rick, how does hospitality reveal the character of God?
So there's almost there's two sides to this. God as the one who is being hospitable, or God as the one who entrusts us with hospitality. And I'll do the second one and then the first. So God entrusts this world with His Son to this world. In other words, this is our home, and He offers up His Son into our care, which we fail miserably with and put Him to death. So it shows our lack of hospitality, in a sense, in the full nature of our sin. He came to our world, we killed Him, and of course He rose from the dead. But God, in redeeming us through the death of His Son, now welcomes us into His abode. So He welcomes us not just into friendship, but into His presence.
Yeah.
He welcomes us into eternal glory, His home with Him for eternity. So that's the picture of the gospel right there. Yeah.
And we got the nature of God too. I love that the whole thing that He welcomes us into His home reminded me of, was it John 14, where Jesus says, in my Father's house are many rooms, I go to prepare a place for you. And that God is presented, His heart and His nature is as Father, not as Creator, not as King and Master. His eternal identity is Father.
Yeah.
He's always that.
Yeah.
Dave, you want to add more to that here a little bit, how hospitality reveals the character of God?
Yeah, I mean, back in the beginning, God creates this world, and as we know from, physicists, the fact that our universe is so hospitable is miraculous. And then not only that, but then God plants a garden and puts Adam in this garden to keep it. He doesn't put him on Mars. He puts him on Earth in a garden, and it's a man-sized place that with provisions for man. An example where we see God's redemptive hospitality that Rick alluded to is the story of the prodigal son, where the son says, "I don't need you. I'm going to be fine on my own." But the father in the story, who shows something of God's character, welcomes the son back. Not only to be just a slave, which was the son's idea. He'll say, "Hey, I just like you even be a slave in his house." And he says, "No." And he puts the robe on him, puts a ring on his finger, kills the fattened calf. And Jesus tells us that He's gone ahead of us to prepare a place for us in the new heavens and the new earth. We don't deserve to be in that place, but we're going to be welcomed in as children, as beloved family.
Yeah, and that eternal state, and you think about in Revelation, describes it as a wedding feast.
Yeah.
Like there's this, all the terms that we would use of hospitality, of a home, of a feast, of a gathering, of a banquet feast, for example. It's presented to us. And it fits the longing of our heart, doesn't it?
It is.
I'll do one more because it's such
please.
a perfect one. is the Pharisee who invites Jesus into his home. Jesus, the traveling teacher at this point, but doesn't trust him, doesn't like him, and it's shown by the fact that he doesn't offer him true hospitality. So he doesn't anoint his head with oil, he doesn't wash his feet as you would and dry them, but he did welcome him into his home. And there's the sinful woman who sort of barges into this sort of gathering and weeps at his feet and washes them with her tears and wipes them with her hair, as if to give Jesus the honor that he deserved that the Pharisee would not give him in his own home. It's just a very powerful picture of hospitality, the hospitality that should have been there welcoming Jesus the Master, and the one who gives it is the sinful woman in town.
Yeah, that's great. So regarding hospitality, the whole family imagery of God as our Father and the host and the one who has a home for us, prepares all things, which is so different than the gods of this world. And the pagan gods, they believe that their gods created mankind to be their slaves, to serve them. That the God, and you oftentimes in mythology you have the people uprising against that and rebelling against the gods. They're presented as slave masters, and these kings just using people. And yet the God of the Bible is hospitable. He is the Father who becomes a servant and opens his home to us and welcomes us in. Let's talk a little bit more about that in the context of the gospel. How does hospitality reflect the gospel of Jesus Christ, the specific message that we've been trying to proclaim week after week in our churches? How does hospitality reflect that and help us better understand what that gospel is? So, Rick, you want to start us off with that one?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is what you're thinking, Michael, but we are strangers. We are the outsider. We are, not part of the family, alienated from God, and yet through Christ He welcomes us into His home, into His family, into relationship with Him. He reconciles us, so we're no longer strangers. We're now part of the family, which is what you do with hospitality, right? You treat someone like family. You open your home to them. They're no longer the stranger, they're your guest. And that the person who at one point was, homeless or at least the outsider is now treated like a son or a daughter. And that's sort of that's the picture of the gospel.
Yeah.
Let me contrast this with the idea, sort of the faulty idea that Christians are basically, to be a Christian is to be someone who's nice. They're someone who smiles, they don't use bad language, they're going to be very polite, when they run into you in public, and that actually doesn't show much of the gospel. But when you invite someone into your home, it requires giving of yourself and your resources, giving of your time. And it requires not just giving, which you could do that, you can give to a charity, which can be sacrificial, but it's inviting someone into my life as well. If you have someone over for dinner, you're going to hang out with them before dinner, during the meal, after the meal. And what's yours becomes theirs for a time. And I all of that gives a much deeper picture and a more beautiful picture and a much more tangible picture of what Jesus came to do for us. He wasn't just kind of being nice. He was sacrificially providing a way for us to come into the life of God, to become related to Him. So, and and I think it shows how bankrupt the idea of I'm a Christian, so I'm a friendly person. Well, it's more than that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And hospitality is the one time in this world that we see where the person who has the power, who owns the place, who is the master and has the wealth, makes himself the servant to the one who is completely at his mercy. And like Christ, you can see Christ at the Last Supper, who is their master and Lord, who created them, for goodness sake, gathering these filthy disciples before him, and he takes off his robe and puts on a towel and washes their feet and becomes servant. He is their host in that way, and beautifully reflects that the King of the universe, who owns everything, He's the one who makes the sacrifice. He's the one who comes not to be served but to serve, who gives His life and at cost to himself, so that we can be saved, that we can be brought home, and he treats us, his guests, like we're royalty, which is amazing. I mean, you never see that anywhere else. It's like you are using your power and position to serve the one who's completely at your mercy. You know, if you cast them out and they are as good as dead, they have no defenders, they're completely vulnerable. They should be the one nervously, and yet you are waiting on them hand and foot.
Yeah.
There's something in that, and everyone knows it's like there's something beautiful about that, because it does reflect the gospel very well. Well, we have a good amount of time left, and we're going to need it because we have a lot to discuss here regarding the practice of this. So one of the things I enjoy doing is, perhaps you've experienced this with yourselves, is when I take a team, especially of young people, to another country, particularly to Africa, where they have a sense of hospitality. And so we'll be staying with some families in South Africa when we go, and most of them are Indian families coming from a culture of hospitality. They understand the importance of it, and they're constantly opening their homes. They're always having people over. They get it, and to see how we're treated as foreigners, it just puts us to shame. So we would go there. I remember still one year we went, and we had one guy, he's a single guy on the trip, and he's staying with this family of 4, the parents, and then they had 2 little kids. And small place, they had a spare bed, they had the kids' room and the master bedroom. And they gave him the master bedroom, and the parents slept in the kids' room with the kids. You know, and they treated him like he owned the place. And it was just shocking to see that, because it's like, that's something we don't do here. You know, it's like, I got a room, it's a guest room, that's the best I'll offer if I offer it at all. You're certainly not sleeping in our room, you know. And so there's that. It was really very convicting for us here to see that, and to see it in other cultures, that when they really value that and how well they treat their guests. And then compared to America, where it's like we are the rugged individuals here. We still have that grain in us, and so we're not very good at this. So let's just say someone in your church is convicted, and they feel they're starting reading some of these texts, they're reading their Bibles, they're seeing that something's not right, and that I've been living a closed and isolated place, I've been basically selfish, God's blessed me with a home, and I've not been using it at all. Where do they begin? What advice would you give them? Try to give a little vision of what it could look like. So we'll start there. What advice would you give them? Where do they begin? If they say, Pastor, I'd like to do something with this. What can I do?
I would say a starting point is to try to, as much as you're able, and this is much harder to do than it might sound at first, is to put out of your mind any visions of Martha Stewart that might be there. Because there's ideas about inviting people over and having guests, and you might call entertaining, that where everything's perfect, and we've all been in places where, that's very enjoyable, and we like to do that on occasion, but that's not what we're called to do. And there's a lot of benefits to say, you know what, tone down your standards, and just open your home in a much more normal way. Make it like a normal night of dinner at your home. It's not as immaculately cleaned. The meal may not have multiple courses, and it just much more laid back. So I guess that might be a starting point, and I'll just name a couple benefits of doing that. One is it makes other people feel like they can do it. If you have someone over and it's a perfect 5-star meal, well, they're not going to feel like they can do that. But also another benefit is anyone can do that. So the person who's not a great cook, if you have pizza and paper plates, let's say you always make frozen meals or whatever. You can have a frozen meal or pizza. That's not the point of it. Is a great meal. Well, there's other benefits too, but doing it that way. But I think that's kind of a starting point.
Yeah, can I just say something kind of funny about that? We happen to have in my church 2 professional chefs, right? And so they're great at hospitality, but they almost never get invited to another person's house because the standards are so high. But they've said, I think one of them said, my favorite meal is Frank and beans. So if somebody just said,
Yeah.
why don't you, I would love to have you guys over. We're just going to cook some hot dogs and some beans. So, but they've made the standard so high because I figured, well, if I'm going to have a professional chef over, I better really.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's more about the opening of the home and welcoming them in than it is about the meal or how cleanly the house is. So.
Do you need to have food?
No, you don't even need to have food.
You don't even need to have food. Yeah.
No.
I think it's helpful, and it's because food is it's a universal, right? We all eat, and it's a way of sharing a meal.
Yeah.
But is it 100% necessary? Not necessary. You could invite someone over to watch a movie or something. I think that can be done.
Let me throw out one more benefit.
I'm going to disagree with you in a minute.
Okay.
Let me throw out one more benefit of lowering the standard. One more benefit of lowering the standard is if we do things like, hey, you know what? When we have people over, we're not going to make it a 3-hour thing. We're going to fit it in between other things we're doing or whatever, or we might even ask them to help us do the dishes. It makes it more, like if otherwise it has to be like once a month because you need to set aside this big block of time. You got to clean the house. But like if you're just fitting it in, you're asking them to help out, then you could kind of do it any time.
I think personally, I think the food is very, very important. I think it's essential to it. It's partly because it talks about in Acts 2 about how they broke bread in their homes, but eating together is a sign of peace and welcome.
That's true. And
that when you don't eat, it's almost a sign of rejection. It's really interesting. It doesn't have to be much. It could be a cracker. It could be just a piece of bread and some butter on it. It doesn't have to be anything significant, but there's something about the eating together that really is a sign. I remember there was one of my favorite novels of all time, The Count of Monte Cristo. There's a scene where he's seeking revenge on his enemies, but they don't know it. They don't know who he is. He invites them to this banquet feast. And what's peculiar is that they're eating themselves silly with all the food. He will not touch a morsel in their presence. Because he knows if I eat this, I am saying you are my friends. And that was the whole problem with Jesus, wasn't it? He ate with sinners. So I think that it doesn't have to be much. It could be a cracker. It could be a potato chip, for goodness sake. But there's something about the eating together. That's why I tell why that fellowship time after church is so important. That you have something to eat, and there have been times when we didn't have anything, and it's a drag. It doesn't work. It's like it doesn't be much. It's a piece of cheese. But anyway, that's a. But I think the point is clear, though. It doesn't need to be expensive. It can be very cheap, even. But there's something having people. Specific occasions. Rick, help us out here. What are some specific times when hospitality could really be a blessing?
Okay. Well, I'll just say one thing is that all churches in the first century were house churches. So there weren't church buildings. They came, I think, the 4th century, 300s. So every Sunday was an opportunity for the owner of a house to show hospitality, welcoming in the church family. And that applies to today by how we treat visitors in our church, in our churches even. So some people say, man, I visited a church, it was cold, I felt like I wasn't welcome, I felt I was at somebody else's gathering. That misses something important about hospitality. But it goes beyond that, certainly, to our actual homes. A great one would be after church inviting a visitor out to dinner, or even better, into your home for dinner. I think that's a great place to start, is that you're willing to say to a visitor, hey, it's nice to meet you, you're in town, find out a little bit about them. Would you like to join us for lunch? And I think that's great. Maybe a step up from that is holidays. It's somebody that has nowhere to go for Christmas, and you're saying, hey, come to my house. We got a bunch of people coming, but would love to have you over for Christmas, for Easter, for Thanksgiving. I think that would be a big step. Maybe a step even beyond that is someone in the church who needs a place to stay. A missionary visiting from out of town. The church could put them up in a hotel, or someone in the church could open their home who has the gift of hospitality and the willingness to do that, and really make them feel welcome at the church. So those would be some examples.
That's great. That's great. Dave, did he cover it all? Are there other areas that you can think of?
I don't know if this fits in here, but something that our family has done is being foster parents. So one thing that's good about that is that there's structures in place. There's that walk you through the process. You get licensed, and there's hundreds of kids in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire where we are that need a home. And so in fact there's a big waiting. It's just a huge need, and And when you do it, you find that that it's just well worth it. I'll end there. But
That's it.
yeah,
That's great. I want to talk a little bit before we conclude with some stories, because I think that will be really helpful, is cautions, concerns. Are there any people who want to venture out on a ministry of hospitality that God has given them a home, or even just an apartment with a little extra table, that they have a space to do this? Do you have any concerns or cautions that they need to be aware of before they really begin this?
Yeah, sometimes people, if people are really in need, it's conceivable, and I've heard some stories where they'll take advantage. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. I know Rick's got some stories along those lines. So, Rick, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, there's always safety concerns. You might have this sweet old lady in the church who loves opening her home, but there's some manipulative person that's kind of making the rounds and is going to take advantage of her financially, or just overdo it with his hospitality state, kind of be a squatter. And as a pastor, it might be wise for us to kind of keep an eye out for that kind of thing and say, this person, and noticing they're really latching onto you, as and really try to be protective. So I've definitely seen safety and or sort of manipulative people who are looking to take advantage of different scenarios, and I've come across that. So
yeah, and that's a real challenge when you know strangers. Is they're strangers, you don't know them, and there are many who are harmless and really in need, but many also who can be quite dangerous. I mean, there's a concern right now. I know I've seen some news reports on the illegal immigrants who are in the area, and these are some of them are just heartbreaking stories of these families, and they're trying to get people to come and take them into their homes. And there's some stories about that. And some of them seem to be some nice stories that seems to work out well, but you can imagine there's probably some others not so. That's put yourself in a vulnerable position. So some real wisdom with that. And I think for starters, I would probably say, if people starting out on these things, you want to start with a simpler and safer bet. Simple, just to kind of get your feet wet with it, to get used to the idea. Any other concerns besides the dangers that may entail if you're careless about whom might be coming into our homes?
I think if you have somebody who's particularly extroverted and is opening their home all the time, to protect that family time, you do want your spouse and your kids to know that they are. I think this can be particularly for pastors who are always opening the home, that they are still first and most important for you, and that there's still a protection of that family time. Now, of course, if you're having family devotions and you invite that guest to join you, that's a great way to kind of welcome them in. But I do think you do want your kids to know, especially when they're younger, that they are the priority. You're a priority in the home, and that this is a safe area for them. That's probably more for the extreme. Extrovert, extreme hospitality person. Most of us aren't opening a home that much. So, but I think that could be a concern for people. Like where the house is just constant, guests coming in and out, and there isn't a protection of that family.
Yeah. So. My caution would be is don't be like my dad. He loved having people over the house. My mom did too, thankfully. But he would often invite people without telling my mom, and he would just say, "Oh, by the way, on the way home, this family of 6 is coming over for dinner," and she'd have to rustle things up and try to get things together. So thankfully, she was very flexible with that. But that can be a real stress if you're not careful. So you want to be of one mind with that too. I know for me, other concerns is, always checking our heart with why we do what we do. When Jesus says, when you do a banquet, don't invite those who can pay you back, the wealthy, the privileged, and so forth like that. That you get your reward. There's no special reward in that, because people love being invited over, and if you invite someone who has connections and wealth and stuff like that, that's to your advantage. You get gain from that. Nothing wrong with doing that, but his challenge is look at your heart, and love overflows to the need, and so. Invite the blind, invite the poor, invite those who can't pay you back. And so always want to be keeping an eye on those folks. We don't want to become
that's a good word.
Cliques. We don't want to become these aristocratic gatherings of wealthy, influential people and
Yeah.
just making the rounds. It's like that's not what biblical hospitality is.
Yeah.
It's bringing in those who would otherwise be not invited, would
Yeah.
be outcast beneath them.
Yeah.
So, any more comments on that before we move on to our final topic here? So I think it's really helpful is just to tell some stories about personal stories, if you would, of how you maybe have experienced the power of hospitality. We are pastors here, so we are required to be hospitable, as you know. And God has graced us through parsonages, through our own homes, that we actually have a place that we can practice this. So we'll start with this. As a host, how have you seen the power of hospitality in your ministry? We'll start there. So Dave, if you want to get us going with that one here. Or you can pass it on to Rick and think about it a bit.
I'm going to start with a foster care story. Just that through doing foster care, one of the things we've been blessed to see is children that we've had be reunited with their families, and we've been able afterward. Those families have kind of opened up to us and responded to invitations to come over to our house. And even this weekend we have a girl staying with us who's a second grader, but when she was a kindergartner, she lived with us for several months, and now when her mom's away on vacation, she feels free to have her stay with us. And I think she feels that we love her. I mean, the family feels that we love her because we've not just been nice people, but we've opened our home. And I guess I'll add to that. From the host side, I'm not sure if this is what you were wanting this part, but I think when we show hospitality, it helps it has shaped our children's values. I think they realize that they think about people differently because they've seen the hospitality that we show, whether it's to people in our church or the foster care. As they've seen us live out our faith, it's become more real to our kids.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about the foster kids. How long did you have those kids?
So three times we've had placements that were each time, I think maybe once was like 6 months, one was 4, and one was 3 months. So
when those kids came to you, how would you describe the difference that made in their lives over just that short period of time, just a few months with your family?
Yeah.
Did you notice a difference in them? And
that's a good question. They were young. They were all very, very young and when they were with us. And in some ways maybe we saw increasing stability, but they were people who young children who were in many ways so hurt by the instability in their lives that they had things called attachment disorder and other challenges like that. So I think it made an impact, but but very, very, probably very small in the long run.
Yeah, and
we have 4.
4 kids yourselves.
Yeah, we have 4 kids, yeah.
And that wasn't too much of a burden for your family.
I think because we also had kids, it was like kind of another just one more in the zoo kind of thing. It's like, we're busy, we're overwhelmed, and just a little more noise,
Yeah, the foster care is a pretty intense form of hospitality.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that to Christians?
Absolutely. I think every Christian should consider it. I don't think everyone it has to do it by any means, but I think it's a way to love people who are in need that are crying out for help. There is a huge need.
Yeah, thanks. Rick, how about you? What's as a host? We'll get into the guest part in a minute too. But as a host, how have you experienced the power of hospitality?
Yeah. So one thing I should say is I'm a natural introvert. So hospitality doesn't come naturally to me. Now my wife is better about it than I am, but so it's always a challenge to try to open them. My home is kind of my castle, my safe space, but absolutely that's a call for everyone, and the pastors are to model that. So we do that on a regular basis. But one thing that really convicted me on this was when I did youth ministry, so going back a while, for 2 years, and taught these bunch of just wonderful teenagers, and they're since then have scattered, and I've done some of their weddings and everything. They've kind of gone up, but one of them came back, and she's walking with the Lord closely now, married and to a Christian man, and she said, you know, more important to me than all of your teaching was coming over to your home. So she and her brothers would come over for Christmas and different things all the time, and seeing how you and Jessica live. That was more powerful to me than all of your teaching, which is kind of discouraging because, like, man, I mean, I put so much work into the teaching, but it's see what I do, not just do what I say, and watching how you as a pastor, you as a Christian live. That's tangible. That's visible. That shows you're not a hypocrite. This is really how you live. A Christian, seeing what a Christian home. This is a person didn't have a Christian home. Didn't grow up in a Christian home, so she had no context for that. And to see it was extremely powerful. And again, she's walking with the Lord still. So that's for me. That's okay. I gotta make sure I'm opening my home on a regular basis.
So what do you're an introvert, and a lot of people that are that way, introvert who just are like the idea of having people in your home, in your space is anxiety. It's not something that there are other people, extrovert people love it. They can't get enough of it. But what do you say to people who are much more introverted and are scared of having people invade their personal space? What would you say to them as one of them?
It's one of them. Yes, I would say, you know, there's probably a gifting of hospitality for those who are particularly great at doing it and do it on a regular basis. And as a pastor too, you'll know the people in your church that you can always turn to. Missionaries in town, I can call this group. They'll almost certainly be opening their home. So there's probably some that have natural gifting. But like we said in the beginning, all Christians are called to do it, and it models the gospel. So I would say just step out in faith and try it. You know, and if it's too much to say, I'm going to have somebody live with me for the next 6 months. Well, just have them over for dinner. Maybe there's a new couple that's joined the church and you're kind of connected with them. Invite them over for dinner. And I mean, the worst that can happen is it's a bad dinner and you don't get, you know. I mean, and then I think you'll really see how powerful it is, and also accept hospitality. We're going to kind of get to that, but it's a gift when you go into someone else's home and see how they live. They get to play host to you. That says something too. That's meaningful for them. Now you've shared something. You've broken bread together. You've seen each other's homes. You know. So.
And you know, with hospitality, it's like I think, you know, going out with somebody for a cup of coffee or going out to lunch with somebody, that's good. That's not a bad thing at all. It's a good thing. I really think the best thing is to have them in your home. There's something about that. You're opening your home, your heart to them. You're treating them like you would treat family. You know, I can go out for lunch with a business partner, with somebody I just have not that much interest in, or like a blind date kind of a thing. But to have someone in your home, that's a big message. I know for me, I grew up, my parents were very big into this. My mom and dad loved having people over, and we always had people over after church. They were always constantly inviting people over. That was good for me, and I know for me, when I knew I was going to be a pastor and I was looking for a wife, I'm like, I need a woman who wants an open home, who's willing to have that. And by God's grace, my wife Christine is that way. And so one of my favorite stories of recent times, it's a very simple one. I serve as a chaplain for some other companies, and often there are a lot of international people that work in these places. And there was one young woman, she's a Chinese woman, just a sweet lady, young, lonely, just away from home. She's so far from home, and she's so lonely. And it was one of the few times where she came up to me just seeking help. She's just so lonely. And you know, as part of the chaplaincy, I'm not allowed to meet with women individually. But I felt like we need to do something here. So I invited her to the house for dinner with my wife there. And she came in, and she was so thrilled to come. She got a nice meal. And when she left, she gave my wife a hug, and my wife said she just melted in my arms. It was like the craving. She could be the mother to her during that time. It made so much to her. It was amazing. And I think about how little it cost us to do that. We just set an extra plate. It wasn't even like we had to make a whole new meal. Like, we're going to eat anyway. We just set an extra plate, and she drove up to us, and she came in. It was like, that was an amazing moment, and it cost us nothing to do that. It was really stunning to see that. I'm like, there was no great sacrifice on our part, but it was just that was amazing. So That was a beautiful moment, and I love those moments. And I think I wish more and more people were willing to just to experience that.
Yeah.
So, second part is personally experiencing the power of hospitality as a guest. When someone opening their home to you made all the difference in the world. So we'll come back in this direction here. How about you, Rick? What?
One short one and then a longer one. So I remember during seminary, the church that I went to, similar to what the story I just told, that the pastor preached probably hundreds of sermons while I was there, and I still remember some of the illustrations and some of the stuff in the sermons. But the thing that sticks out is the time he invited me over to his home, and that's what sticks out. Remember, at his house, shared a meal, had some conversation. So. But one more extended one was during seminary again, we had ended our lease and we needed a place to stay. And one of my seminary professors opened his home to me and my wife and my son. And not only that, he and his family were going overseas to do overseas studies, I think in Geneva. And he just let us stay in his home the whole summer, so months on end. And when he came back, we hadn't found a new place yet, so we were all living in the same home together, which was a little chaotic, and I felt bad about it. But he was, and that was just, I'll never forget the fact that he opened his home and just gave us the key and said, just stay here. Didn't charge us anything like that. Just said, make my home your home. We're not here for the summer anyway. So, and I think that really stood out to me, and it was extremely meaningful. So he was. That
was in seminary.
That was in seminary.
And you're a single guy at that time.
No, I had my wife and my son.
Oh wow!
And he opened us, and he had his own 2 young girls, and so, Scott managed. So it was a really.
Are you still in touch with him?
Yes, from time to time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
So
that's great. Dave, how about you?
Yeah. I think about sometimes that. Different pastors have had me over. Now, I've been the pastor of our church for a decade and a half, but I'm thinking in the early 2000s when, I was new at a church in Wheaton, Illinois, and for the pastor to just have me over and we just had dinner with his family, so I'm single at the time. But from then on, I felt, when he's preaching, when he's doing, I just always felt loved and accepted, and I just felt connected with him. He didn't do anything special we probably had spaghetti. I don't even remember what we had. But then later I think about when I was in ministry and I was on staff at a large church, and when the head pastor, who was well known, he had books published, he was, he's a small time celebrity because of his pulpit ministry, but for Christmas, he and his wife would have all the other staff over his house, and they would wait table on us. He put on like an apron, and they would come around and take our orders and clear our places. And it just, it was so much easier to kind of serve him from then on. I felt loved and connected with him. One other story briefly is not long after we moved to where we are in Danville, New Hampshire, and the power went out, and we lost power for some significant amount of time, and we didn't have a wood stove or a generator. And there was another family from the church that just invited us over, and I think I don't even know, we watched football, we roasted marshmallows on the wood stove, I don't know what we did. But the effect was, not only did we feel connected to them, it made us feel sort of cared, safe in this. We were far from anywhere we'd lived before, but it was like, well, God's watching over us here. And so we felt something of God's arms around us because someone was neighborly. They showed hospitality to us, and I could even share more stories, but I've been really touched in my life.
We got time. You can share another story if you want.
Those are the main ones that come to mind. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would just say too, someone who's out there maybe and they're part of a church and they feel like, man, my church just doesn't have this level of community and family and friendship, and start by inviting some people over to your home. That's where you're going to start really feeling like a family, like a church family. Totally. So, and then I just want to say, so there's, it's really fitting that Michael John is doing this particular subject, because I'm okay to share this, but every year the Johns open up their home and do a pastor's Christmas gathering, and everyone all the pastors get excited because every year this is coming. And we know that we're going to go and gather, have a great time, sing some Christmas carols together, enjoy some food. So you're the hospitable, you're the hospitality person to the hospitality pastor. So really appreciate that.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
I wanted to share my first real powerful experience with hospitality was, again, I grew up in a home that was always open. We were always the host. We always had people over, and that was great. I was always at home, and I grew up in Rhode Island. I never left. I went to college in Rhode Island, and so when I'm 22, I leave and I head to Texas, and I'm down in Houston teaching, and I don't know anybody, and I'm thousands of miles away from my family, and there's no cell phones, of course. And if you remember the days when a long distance call would cost you an awful lot, and it was just so far from home. And I remember I'm at the school that I'm teaching, and there's a Puerto Rican major who was leading the ROTC program at the church, at the school, I'm sorry, named Major Rodriguez. And Major Rodriguez just decided to take me under his wing, and he became friends. He had 3 girls who were roughly my age, and then he finds out that I don't have any plans for Thanksgiving, because I can go home for Christmas, but I can't go home for Thanksgiving. And that's a big deal for me. Mm-hmm. And he invites me over for Thanksgiving. So I go have Thanksgiving with this. I have nothing in common with them. They're a Puerto Rican family, very friendly, wonderful folks. And it made so much a difference for me.
Yeah.
Such a difference for me. I got to think about what I would have been doing if it hadn't happened. I'd be probably alone in my apartment. I didn't have a roommate even at that time. And it would have been a very painful time. And he really helped me get through one of the hardest years of my life. Was that first year down there by myself, teaching the first time. That was a really beautiful moment for me and really helpful. And just, again, for him it was easy. It was just setting an extra plate. It was not a big deal. He didn't think it as a Herculean task. Mm-hmm. It was such a simple thing, but it was thoughtful, and he brought me in, and it made all the difference for me that year. That was really helpful through a very tough year. So I'm very thankful to God for that. Well, we have a few minutes left here, so I'm just wondering if we could, any final words, any bits of advice, and maybe even if you think about advice for those who are invited over. I mean, there's a way to be a good host. There's also a way to be a good guest. I don't know if you guys have any final comments or thoughts about that. And maybe we can close it out in a few minutes here.
I'd like to say a few words of encouragement to the reticent, the hesitant. Jesus says, if anyone would come after me, he needs to deny himself, pick up his cross, and follow me. He tells us, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. And I find it amazing. I'm actually amazed that so many Christians don't think that they're commanded to be hospitable. But I'll give you a positive vision for this. Well, let me start out negatively and then make it positive. I think most Christians are probably discouraged about the decline of faith in our country. Yeah. And I just think, what if we had been, over these last century, setting a new vision and living out a different kind of life that was, among other things, hospitable as Christians. But looking forward, there's a huge opportunity as there's this epidemic of loneliness in our country. What an opportunity for Christians, not by, we don't have to take over Congress. We don't have to get our candidate voted in. What if we started just opening our home for meals, and that was something that's unique. Mm-hmm. And it's something we're commanded to do, and it reflects the gospel, and it reflects God. Yeah. So I'd urge people to just try it once. And I think you'd be very encouraged by how God would use you and how you'd grow closer to God through doing it, through obeying that command. Yeah.
Amen. That's great. That's a great word.
Yeah. Rick? Just thinking the two ways in which hospitality can be really used is in terms of fellowship within your church family and in terms of evangelism. But in terms of fellowship first, the idea that are we friends? It's one thing to say, okay, we share the same theology, we share the same membership out of a local church, but are we actually friends? There's a quote from G.K. Chesterton, the early 1900s journalist, Catholic, but I can't remember the exact quote. I'm going to butcher it, but something to the effect of, we can be partners in sort of a similar beliefs, but we're not really sort of family until we can be friends. And I was just thinking of, Michael, even your cross ethnic sort of, a Puerto Rican friend that, despite all the sort of stuff out there about woke and all that, the real answer is, are you friends? Are you willing to open your home to a Puerto Rican family, an Asian family, or a white family, or a black family? I'm mixed race myself, and say we're just brothers. We're brothers and sisters. We're family. It has nothing to do with that. That's the answer, right? It's not just that we need some, big sort of new policy. Are we united in our faith, and are we brothers and sisters?
Amen.
And then on the evangelistic one, again, so powerful to open your home to a non-believer, even with very different beliefs and very different lifestyle. And I think of the example of Rosaria Butterfield, who was a lesbian English teacher, ultra liberal, and she said who came to faith. And the thing it was a small-time pastor who just invited her over, him and his wife, and cooked dinner, and let her ask any question she wanted, and come back. Didn't unoffendable, right? And over time, he answered all her questions best he could, and treated her with love and respect. And that was the most powerful thing evangelistically for her to experience the love of a Christian, not just the worldview or the theology of a Christian. So,
that's great. That's great. I would just say, I have a couple thoughts for those who are guests. I have a rule for myself when I'm invited. I always say yes, unless I feel like I'm in physical danger or something like that. No matter who invites me over, I always say yes, and we'll find a time to make it work if it doesn't work when they invite me. I never want to turn down an invitation. And secondly, if you're invited to something, don't be late. If you're going to be late, let them know. Be really respectful of their time, and always ask if you can bring something. Even if they say no, but always just being sensitive to the host. So you want to encourage that with them too, make it an enjoyable experience for them. But other part too, as I'm reflecting more about what I love about this is the kind of ministry that has the power to really make a difference and change things. And the beauty of it is you don't have to wait for your church to organize something for you, or the government to organize something. You can do it right now, even today. You can make a phone call, have someone over. And if I challenge you too, especially some people who maybe are a little older, or widows, or just have a lot of time on their hands and don't know what to do with it. My mom is 87, and when my dad died, after he died 20 years ago, she started getting back involved with her church. Now at that time, she's in her late 60s, and then she decides she made it her personal goal to have everyone in that church come over her house. And so she had the lists, and she started just after church, she invited this couple over, and they came over and made them a little lunch. And then the next week, she invited another couple over. And I think she got through. It wasn't a big church. But that made all the difference for so many people in that church. It was so powerful. And it's not going to be some big evangelistic event. It's not going to be some big monumental program that's going to shift the tide. It's going to be millions of little gatherings in homes, little dinners, little this, little that. That's going to make all the difference, And when Jesus talks about us as the salt of the earth, like you can just see that little invisible salt grains scattered all over the place, just flavoring and saving everything. And so that's my hope for the church. And I would just say to churches, you might want to consider just canceling all your programs and just get out there and get home and have people in your homes, and it will be such a blessing. So with that, thank you, men, for a great discussion.
Thank you.
And I hope this was helpful to you, and hope it's something that will inspire some to take on this wonderful ministry of hospitality. So thank you again to our panel. Thank you for tuning in. And may we all grow together in the grace and knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. And we pray God will bless you and keep you. And we'll see you next time on Crossroads. Thanks.